Her only friend was desperately ill. A blizzard was raging, and her dog was dying, all because of her own negligence. She knew she shouldn't make the call, but Elara Vance picked up the phone. She pleaded, she begged, she forced her only friend to drive into the eye of the storm. That night, she managed to save her loyal companion, and in doing so, she killed her only friend. This is the story of the devastating price of selfishness and a loyalty tested until it shattered. Elara Vance stood on the wide, peeling porch of Whispering Pines, a queen surveying a dying kingdom. She was 23, with hair the color of dark pine resin and eyes that held the green certainty of the Willamette Valley. But the certainty was a bluff. The white paint of the grand old house, her family's legacy built on a century of logging, was flaking to reveal gray wood beneath. The gardens were overgrown. Whispering Pines was drowning in debt, and Elara was drowning with it. Her thoughts, as always, were on Liam Kincaid. Liam, whose family owned the neighboring, smaller mill. He was not practical or sharp. He was an artist, a man who believed in sustainable logging and handcrafted furniture. To Elara, he was the living embodiment of the golden age she so desperately missed. Marrying him, she believed, was the only way to merge their legacies and save her world. The Willamette Timber Festival was where her world cracked. The air smelled of sawdust, frying onions, and damp earth. Liam Kincaid, handsome and soft-spoken, stood on the small-town stage. Elara watched from the crowd, her smile fixed, waiting for him to seek her out. Then he introduced the woman beside him. "I'm so proud to announce my future wife," Liam said, his voice carrying over the speakers. "Sarah Jenkins." Elara did not know Sarah well. She was the local veterinarian, a woman with kind, plain eyes and capable hands. The humiliation felt like a physical blow, hot and sharp. Elara turned and walked away, ignoring the calls of neighbors. It was Sarah who found her an hour later, near the livestock pens. "Elara, are you all right?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. Elara wanted to scream at her. Instead, she just nodded stiffly. I found him near the highway," Sarah stumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "I've stitched him up, but I can't keep him at the clinic. With the new baby coming—" Behind her, on a thick rope lead, was the dog. He was a German shepherd, but not the sleek black and tan of show lines. This one was all-weather, a mix of wolf gray and white, his coat matted with burrs. He didn't plead or whine. He just watched Elara with eyes that were ancient, practical, and held no illusions. "Just until I can find him a permanent spot?" Sarah asked. "You have so much land." Elara looked at the dog, then at the woman who had stolen her future. A cold, calculating thought surfaced. "Fine," Elara said sharply. She would do it not out of kindness, but out of spite, a way to make Sarah Jenkins indebted to her. That night, the facade broke. Elara sat at her father's massive empty desk in the study, the ledgers open. She wasn't looking at them. She was crying, quiet, bitter tears of self-pity for the life she had lost. For Liam, the dog, whom she hadn't bothered to name, had been quiet in the corner. He stood, his claws making small ticking sounds on the hardwood floor. Elara looked up, expecting a wet nose, a gesture of comfort. He did not walk to her. He walked to the desk. He nudged the precarious stack of unopened mail with his nose. A flutter of white and red-stamped envelopes cascaded to the floor, landing by her feet. Elara stared, the tears freezing on her face. The red-stamped words seemed to shout at her from the envelopes. Overdue, final notice, delinquent. The dog, Jack, looked at the bills, then at her. He hadn't offered comfort. He had offered the cold, hard truth. The drought had strangled the Willamette Valley for 3 months, leaving the ancient forests tinder dry. The air was a hazy, suffocating yellow. Elara had driven into town in her father's old truck, a necessary, humiliating trip. Jack sat silent in the passenger seat, his gray-white fur a stark contrast to the red dust coating the dashboard. She was in the local bank, pleading with Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, a man she had known her entire life. "Elara, I cannot authorize another extension," he said, his voice quiet with pity. "The board won't allow it. Whispering Pines is too far leveraged. Just until the next harvest, she began. A sudden shout from the street outside cut her off. Then another. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened, looking past her. Elara ran outside, Jack instantly alert at her side. The sky to the west was gone. In its place was a rolling, churning wall of black smoke and pulsing orange. A terrible, low roar filled the air, the sound of 1,000,000 trees consumed at once. Embers, like angry stars, began to rain down on the main street. The Cedar Creek fire had finally broken its containment lines. Panic was immediate. People ran. Cars clogged the street, horns blaring in a useless symphony of terror. Elara's eyes scanned frantically. Liam! She spotted them near Liam's small artisan shop. Sarah, visibly pregnant and pale, was trying to pull Liam by the arm. Liam, we have to go! Now! But Liam, his face a mask of disbelief, was not listening. He was frantically trying to load antique books and a heavy, hand-carved rocking chair into the back of his small car. My grandfather's journals, he yelled, his voice cracking. This chair. I can't leave them. Liam, Elara screamed, running to them as Jack kept pace at her heel. Are you insane? We have to run. The heat was a physical weight, pressing against them. Liam ignored her, turning back to the shop for another load. That was when Jack acted. A low, menacing rumble started deep in the shepherd's chest. It was not a bark of fear, but a growl of pure, practical authority. He lunged forward. He did not attack Liam, but moved directly in front of him, physically blocking his path to the shop door. He planted his gray body and did not move. When Liam tried to step around him, Jack rose onto his hind legs, placed his front paws firmly on Liam's chest, and shoved him back with a decisive push. Liam stumbled, shocked. Then Jack turned his head, let out a single, sharp, commanding bark directly at Sarah. He nudged her with his head toward the alleyway beside the shop. The message was unmistakable. She was the priority, not the junk. Elara watched, frozen. In that single, terrible moment, the illusion that had defined her life shattered. Liam, the man she idealized as the sensitive soul of the past, was just a frightened man, clinging to dead wood. Jack, the stray dog she had barely wanted, was the only one thinking, the only one acting with courage. The scales fell from her eyes. He's right, Elara said, her voice hard as steel. We follow the dog. Jack did not hesitate. He led them away from the jammed streets toward a dry creek bed that ran behind the town, a scar in the earth he must have known from his days as a stray. He moved with a purpose, a survivor leading his new, broken pack out of the inferno. The air that greeted them at Whispering Pines was thick with ash and the acrid smell of burnt timber. It was late afternoon, the sun a bruised orange through the smoke. Liam and Sarah, weary and quiet, had gone to Liam's charred property, clutching each other. Elara stood alone on her porch, Jack a silent sentinel beside her. The grand house, miraculously, still stood. The red brick had absorbed the heat, the slate roof had resisted the embers. But the world around it was utterly transformed. The sprawling timber yard, once a hive of activity with stacked lumber and roaring saws, was a wasteland of blackened beams and smoldering sawdust. The majestic pine forests, the source of Vance family wealth for a century, were reduced to skeletal carbonized fingers reaching futilely at the sky. Her father, Old Man Vance, a man of hearty laughter and booming commands, was a ghost of himself. He sat in his favorite armchair by the cold hearth, staring blankly ahead, his once vibrant eyes now vacant and dull. He spoke of nothing but the good old days, of the vastness of their forests, oblivious to the ruins outside. Her mother, Mrs. Vance, a delicate woman accustomed to a life of ease, was confined to her bed, too grief-stricken to move. A few days later, a stern-faced man from the Willamette Valley Bank arrived, carrying official papers. His name was Mr. Davison, a precise and humorless man. He wasn't the kindly Mr. Henderson from town. He was from the corporate office. Miss Vance, he said, his voice clipped, the loan defaults on the timber operation are too extensive. With the mill destroyed and the lumber supply gone, the bank has no choice. We are moving to foreclose on Whispering Pines. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Foreclose. Lose it all. The very thought was a physical pain, colder than any ash. She fought back the urge to beg, to scream. She pictured Liam, gentle and lost, unable to even save his books. She couldn't be like him. Mr. Davison left, his words echoing in the desolate silence of the house. Elara walked out onto the once manicured lawn, now a blanket of gray ash. She kicked at a charred lump and it crumbled. The stench of ruin clung to everything. Jack, who had been following her, stopped. He began to nose at the ground, sniffing intently. Then, with a quiet scrape of his paws, he started to dig. He wasn't looking for bones or toys. His strong jaws closed around something small and dark, half buried in the ash. He pulled it free. It was a gnarled, blackened root, tough and resilient, stained dark with the earth it had clung to. He began to chew on it slowly, methodically, his gaze fixed on Elara. It was a raw, primal act of survival. Elara watched him. A desperate, burning ember flickered within her. Jack wasn't mourning. He wasn't giving up. He was simply surviving. He was extracting sustenance from the very destruction that surrounded them. She looked from the root in Jack's mouth to the skeletal trees, then to the grand, silent house. Her legacy, the humiliation, the despair, the overwhelming grief, it all coalesced into a fierce, cold resolve. Elara knelt, her fingers digging into the gritty ash. She grabbed a handful of the blackened soil, crushing it in her palm. The dust coated her skin, merging with the tears she finally allowed to fall. She looked up at the vast, desolate sky. "I swear it," she whispered, her voice raw but clear. "By all that is holy and all that is left, I will never let this land go. I will never be hungry again." Jack watched her, his chewing slow and steady. He understood. The months that followed the Cedar Creek fire were a time of grim survival. The reconstruction, as the politicians called it, was just a polite word for a desperate scramble over scraps. Elara's vow on the ashes had cooled into a core of ice. The soft, grieving girl was gone, replaced by a sharp-eyed businesswoman whose only purpose was the preservation of Whispering Pines. Opportunistic timber buyers smelling profit in the valley's disaster arrived from Portland and California. They were ruthless men, expecting to buy salvaged, fire-kissed logs for pennies. Elara learned to be more ruthless. She promised the same tract of salvaged timber to 2 different buyers, took deposits from both, and then sold the lot to a third for cash. To harvest the timber, she hired a crew of transient workers, men displaced by the fire who had nowhere else to go. Her foreman was Jonas, a large, weary-eyed man whose skill with a chainsaw was only matched by his desperation to feed his family. Elara paid them half the promised rate, claiming the buyers had cheated her. She was exploiting them, and she knew it. While Elara's bank account slowly refilled, the rest of the town grew to despise her. Liam and Sarah, who had lost their own small home, were the valley's heart. They ran a donation drive from a church basement, organized volunteers to rebuild, and Sarah offered her veterinary services for free. They were penniless, but beloved. Elara was becoming solvent, but she was utterly alone. Her only companion was Jack. He was her constant shadow, a silent bodyguard. He sat in the cab of her truck, watching the shady deals and the arguments with her crew. His intelligent gray eyes observed her transformation. The playful nudges and moments of connection were gone. He was still loyal, still protective, but a new, wary distance had settled between them. He watched her become someone he did not seem to recognize. The tension broke on a cold, wet night. Elara was driving back from the logging site, a metal cash box on the seat beside her. 3 figures stepped out onto the dark logging road, blocking the truck's headlights. It was Jonas and 2 of his men. "You cheated us, Miss Vance," Jonas said, his voice low and dangerous. He wrenched the truck door open and grabbed her arm. Before Elara could even scream, a blur of gray-white exploded from the passenger seat. Jack was silent, fast, and terrifying. He hit the man beside Jonas, knocking him flat. Jonas released Elara, turning just as Jack lunged again. The dog's jaws closed on Jonas's forearm. The foreman shrieked, a high, piercing sound of pain, and stumbled back, clutching his arm. The other men, terrified by the silent fury of the attack, dragged Jonas into the darkness of the woods. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline making her sick. Jack stood by the open truck door, chest heaving, a low growl still vibrating in his throat. He looked at her, expecting praise. Elara's fear turned instantly to a cold, practical fury. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice trembling. "You stupid dog. That was Jonas, my foreman. Do you know how hard it is to find a crew chief? I needed him for the morning shift." Jack stopped growling. The low sound died in his throat. He looked at her, then at the blood on the gravel. He had defended her, and she was angry. He visibly deflated, his head lowering, his tail dropping. He had protected his alpha, but his alpha was protecting the enemy. The confusion and hurt in his eyes were sharp. He slowly got back in the truck. The distance between them on the bench seat felt for the first time like an unbridgeable canyon. Winter arrived in Oregon not as a gentle blanket, but as a fist. A blizzard descended from the Cascades, burying the valley in feet of snow. The wind howled, a high, mournful sound against the windows of whispering pines. Elara, however, was consumed by her work. She spent her days in the study, calculating profits, her mind sharp and focused. She had ignored the repeated complaints from her skeletal crew that the old electric fence line, damaged in the fire, was shorting out near the south pasture. Fixing it was expensive. It was not a priority. Jack, restless from being indoors and alienated by Elara's coldness, shot out of the house the moment she opened the door. He craved the run. An hour later, he did not return. Annoyed, Elara pulled on her coat and followed his tracks. She found him by the broken south fence. A startled deer leaped away into the whiteout. Jack was not moving. He was lying in the snow, a jagged piece of a fire-damaged metal fence post protruding from his side. He had tried to jump the buried fence in pursuit of the deer and had been impaled. A terrible, quiet whimpering sound escaped him as his blood stained the snow a deep, sickening crimson. The ice in Elara's veins shattered. This was Jack. This was her Jack. Panic, raw and hot, flooded her. She managed to carry him back to the kitchen, her muscles screaming. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. "Sarah, it's Jack. He's dying. Please." Sarah's voice was weak, thin, and interrupted by a wet cough. "Elara, I just brought the baby home. I'm sick. The roads are closed. Liam says no one should be driving." Elara heard Liam's voice in the background, firm and muffled, telling Sarah no. "I don't care what Liam says," Elara shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat. She was crying now, ugly, desperate sobs. "Sarah, you have to come. You have to save him. He's all I have left. Please, please, Sarah. He's bleeding everywhere." She was hysterical, manipulative, and she knew it. A long, exhausted silence. Then Sarah's voice defeated. "I'll try. Keep him warm." It felt like years. Finally, the headlights of Sarah's truck cut through the blizzard. She stumbled in, pale and shivering, carrying her veterinary bag. For 2 hours, by the light of the kitchen lamp, Sarah Jenkins, with the steady, capable hands Elara had once dismissed as plain, saved Jack's life. She stitched the deep wound, administered antibiotics, and started an IV. "He'll be weak," Sarah whispered, packing her bag. Her face was gray with exhaustion, but the post missed his lung. "He'll make it." "Thank you, Sarah. Elara began. "Just take care of him, Elara." Sarah zipped her bag. "I need to get back to my baby." Elara watched the truck's red taillights disappear into the swirling white. She turned back to Jack, relief so profound it made her dizzy. The call came at dawn. It was Liam. His voice was not soft. It was broken, destroyed, and filled with a new, terrible hatred. "The police found her truck," Liam choked out. "She slid off the ice on the old bridge. Elara, she's dead." Elara dropped the phone. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by Jack's shallow breathing. Sarah was dead. Dead because Elara was too cheap to fix a fence. dead because Elara was too selfish to wait. Elara sank to the floor, a howl of realization stuck in her throat. She had done this. The funeral was a blur of black coats and gray, trampled snow. Elara stood at the back of the small crowd, an outcast separated by a chasm of her own making. Liam, his face hollowed and aged by grief, stood by the grave holding his swaddled newborn son. He never once looked her way. She was the woman who had killed the valley's saint. She returned to Whispering Pines. The grand house was cold and deathly quiet, the silence broken only by the sound of Jack's movement, a soft click, a pause, and then a drag. He was recovering, just as Sarah had promised. But the dog that emerged from the fever and the pain was not the same. The wound on his side had healed into a tight, puckered scar, pulling his skin taut. The metal post had damaged the muscle permanently. He now moved with a heavy, pronounced limp, his right hind leg dragging slightly with every step. Elara sat on the cold hearth of the fireplace, watching him. The fight was gone from her. She looked at this broken gray shepherd, the physical evidence of her own catastrophic failure. She finally understood. Liam was not a grand ideal. He was a weak, beautiful mirage. Sarah, with her plain face and capable hands, had been her only true friend, and she had murdered her. A wretched animal sound tore itself from Elara's throat. She crawled across the floor to the dog, burying her face in the thick fur of his neck. "I'm sorry," she wept, her body shaking with convulsive sobs. "Jack, I'm so sorry. It was me. It was all my fault." The confession poured out of her, the words she could never say to Liam, the words Sarah would never hear. "I was selfish. I was so stupid. I love you, Jack. Please don't leave me. You're all I have. Please, I need you." Jack stood stiffly under her desperate embrace. He was tired. He was physically exhausted from the trauma of his wound, but he was also emotionally exhausted by her. He had watched her become a person he didn't know, and the price for her ambition had been his body and Sarah's life. He had nothing left to give her. He waited patiently until her sobs began to quiet. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and gave her shaking, wet hand a single dry lick. It was not a kiss, it was an acknowledgement, perhaps it was forgiveness, but it was also a farewell. With a soft, weary sigh, Jack gently pushed his head out from under her arm. He limped across the study, his claws clicking and dragging on the floorboards. He reached the fireplace, circled once, and lay down with his back to her, facing the dying embers. The rejection was absolute, quieter and more profound than any human anger. Elara sat alone on the floor, the space beside her cold and empty. She had lost the illusion, she had lost her conscience, and she had lost the unconditional, wild loyalty of the only creature who had ever truly seen her. She looked out the window, past her own reflection. The blizzard had passed. In the distance, on the scarred black hillsides, she could see tiny, impossible specks of green pushing up through the ash. The forest was returning. She still had Whispering Pines. Elara wiped her eyes, her breath steadying. "It's all right," she whispered to the empty room and to the dog who would not look at her. "It will be okay." She took a breath. After all, tomorrow is another day. Perhaps the deepest lesson from Elara's story is that the illusions we chase are loud, while the loyalty we truly need is quiet, practical, and tragically easy to overlook. Jack reminds us that love is not just a feeling, but an action. If this story of survival and regret touched you, please give it a like and share it with someone who understands the value of quiet loyalty. Our community is built on these shared feelings. We would love to read your story in the comments. Tell us about the loyal Jack in your own life. Please subscribe to continue this narrative journey with us and click the video on your screen for our next tale.